Hi guys, so our composition focus for this module is on writing a persuasive paragraph. This is probably the type of writing that you are most familiar with. It's actually one that is taught a good bit in high school. And the goal here is to convince a reader that your point is valid. So let's talk a little bit more about what a persuasive paragraph is and how we write one. So some goals for a persuasive paragraph are to convince a reader that your perspective is valid or that you're right, to encourage a reader to take a certain action or point of view, to use evidence to make a logical argument, and most importantly, to take a stance and explain why you think or feel that way. In argumentative paragraphs, which are a sibling to persuasive paragraphs, you want to pretend you're objective. In persuasives, you really don't need to do that as much. It's okay to be very clear on where you stand. And you always want to explain your thought process because that's what's going to differentiate your argument from someone else's. So some main strategies, I've talked about kind of briefly about introducing, presenting, and analyzing evidence, which I call IPA. So that's going to be your bread and butter here. You want to introduce any evidence you have, you want to present it, and then you want to analyze it. When we get to when you get to research papers and essays later on, the evidence will be in the form of a quote, but this works even if you're not using a quote. And a lot of you were doing really well at this already. Compare and contrast. This is what we did last module, where you want to compare one position with another or one piece of evidence with another. This is one of the reasons that this set of skills is so important, is because you do use them in persuasive and argumentative writing a lot. You will use a lot of compare contrast, and you use them to normally support your stance, whatever your stance may be. And you can use appeals to convince your reader of your perspective, especially in persuasive writing. So logos, we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail on this, but logos is the use of logic and facts and data. Pathos is the use of emotion. So it's like an anecdote or a story, anything that makes your reader feel something. And ethos appeals to your credibility or reputation. It's basically showing the reader why they should listen to you instead of someone else who maybe says something different. There's a lot more to these rhetorical appeals, but you'll generally go into those in more detail in 102. And in 141. So we don't need to go into a whole lot of detail on them now, but they are good things for you to know, to kind of think about how you're using those three things when you're writing these types of paragraphs. So the structure here is really, really, really predictable. You start with a topic sentence, which later we'll talk about how to make that into a thesis. The key here is that it has to be arguable. A persuasive paragraph can't be something that is just a statement of fact. The sky is blue. Well, yeah, the sky is blue. So we don't really need a paragraph explaining that. 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, it's 2 + 2 = 4. It's not something that anyone can disagree with, really. And your topic sentence should include, we'll go into more detail about how to do this, but your claim and your main evidence. And I'm really going to be looking for a specific format in your topic sentences here because we're going to be using them to make thesis statements when we get to essays in a week or so. So your exposition, you're going to follow that IPA. You're going to introduce your evidence, you're going to present it, you're going to analyze it, and then you're going to rinse and repeat until you get to your transition sentence. Just, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. In the transition sentence, you're going to restate the claim and evidence, and you're going to explain why it matters. This is also basically a shrunken down form of the structure for an essay as well. So the persuasive paragraph is really kind of to help bridge from what we've been doing in paragraphs to essays, just helping you to think like an essay. And you're going to want to use this very, very formulaic approach to write these, because they really does work better. I have a Skillshare video out there where I demonstrate that you can write an essay about something completely ridiculous. If you use this form, it will make sense. I think I said that everyone who gets a speeding ticket should be beheaded. But it works if you use this structure. people will believe you. So prompts. Most college writing is in this mode. Is it persuasive or argumentative? It is the backbone of how we do analytical thought in higher education. So some signal words that you might want to look for: explain, consider, relate, opinion, think, why or why not. If you see those types of words or phrases, you're probably looking at a persuasive or argumentative paragraph or essay. A lot of times your prompts now will be in questions. So do you agree with this statement? Why or why not? That's the kind of thing that a lot of these prompts will be phrased as. And in answering the question, you will most of the time come up with a stance, which will help you to create your topic sentence from there. So prompts will always ask you to take a stance in persuasive writing. So the first thing you want to do is decide what side of the stance, you decide your stance. What side are you on? And you're going to start your sentence with your stance. So for example, do you think that uniforms should be required in high school? Why or why not? So you can see that I've highlighted some words from the prompt words before to show that this is in fact a persuasive prompt. So how do we take that question and turn it into the beginning of a topic sentence? Well, do you think that uniforms should be required in high school? Why or why not? Uniforms should not be required in high school because blank. I've just said, rephrase the prompt and said what side of it I'm on. I don't think that uniforms should be required, or at least me using this example doesn't think that uniforms should be required. So then do some quick pre-writing. So what are some reasons you can think of to fill in the blanks at the last step? We'll try to come up with at least 3 and think about how they support your claim. So in my example, what would be some reasons I could think of that uniforms should not be required in public high schools? So they stifle creativity. They put an undue financial burden on students. They limit cultural expression, things like that. And then I might think about how they support my claim. Well, if it creates additional financial liability for students who maybe are poor, then they may not be able to go to school if they can't afford the uniforms. If it stifles creativity, then students may feel like they can't express themselves at an important part in their life to do that. So that's not going to be a good thing. It's going to reduce their identity. If it's stifling cultural expression, that might open the school up to lawsuits or discrimination. So then, so that's explaining how those reasons support my stance or my claim. So then you're going to use the blanks to create a topic sentence, and this is actually the same format we will use for a thesis statement later on. So the general format is X equals A plus B plus C. So the claim is X is valid because evidence, and evidence is A plus B plus C. So in this example, do you think that uniforms should be required in high school? Why or why not? My claim, X, is uniforms should not be required in high school because... And then I'm going to list my A, B, and C. They stifle student creativity, place an unnecessary financial burden on families, and discourage students from developing a unique sense of self. And so you can see that this lists your claim, and it lists the 3 main points that you're going to make in your paragraph or essay. And again, I'd want you to use this for your topic sentence for this assignment. It's going to really help you later on. So then you want to write your exposition, and this is really formulaic. You start with point A, you introduce it, then you present your evidence, and then you explain why that evidence is important, and you do the exact same thing with point B. You introduce it, present it, and analyze it, and then you do the exact same thing with point C, and introduce, present it, and analyze it. And then from there, you will get to your transition statement or transition sentence. But before you do that, just some kind of tips and some things to think about where students tend to get stuck on this. It's really important to explain why you feel the way you do. Your reader may not have the same thought process as you do, so even if you say something and it sounds obvious, the reader may not come to the same conclusion unless you explain why you think the way that you do or feel the way that you do. Then they're more likely to agree with you. You want to use evidence, logic, and emotion to support your points. All of those will help to make your argument much stronger. They'll help to make the persuasive part, well, much more persuasive. Anything you say in the paragraph should connect back to the topic sentence. When we get to the essays, and everything you say in the body is going to need to connect back to your thesis. And in this type of writing in particular, thesis and topic sentences are made the same way, so I'm kind of using the terms interchangeably, but we'll talk more about thesis statements next week. And other people should be able to disagree with you. Now, you want to make your argument as strong as possible to make that as hard on them as you can, but they should be able to come in and say, here's why I don't agree. You might think that uniforms should be required in public schools, and that makes it a good topic sentence, makes it a good claim for a persuasive paragraph, because you can disagree with me and you can provide different reasons why you disagree with me. If you get stuck, you want to ask yourself, does my evidence support my claim? Why did I include this piece of evidence? That's a big one students often and people often struggle with, is they'll include evidence and they won't explain it. So then just ask yourself, why did I include it? Why did I think this was important enough to put in my paragraph? And then explain your reasoning. What do I want the reader to learn or think, or how do I want the reader to react? Those are also good things for the analyze step. They're even better for the transition sentence. So now let's get to that transition sentence. Like with our other paragraphs, we're going to be paraphrasing our thesis statement or topic sentence. And we're just going to add the reasons why this is important. Some things you can use to get that. What consequences come from the other perspective? So let's say we're using the uniform example. So my transition sentence, I might talk about if we continue to require uniforms in schools, then we are discouraging students from developing a sense of identity, making it harder for them to go to school, and limiting their cultural expression, all of which will have many consequences in their future lives. That might be a transition sentence for that paragraph. Another thing is, what do you want the reader to do, especially if you're trying to persuade them to take a certain action? You might end the paragraph by saying, you should do, don't say you, but do this. And or how do you want them to react? That's also something you can consider including in the transition sentence. So here's a resource you might want to look at for examples of argumentative language. We don't need to go into too much detail about this right now, but it can help you to kind of figure out how to form your writing here, and what sorts of language we use in these types of paragraphs. So we're going to stop here, and then we're going to go through the example paragraph. So I will be back in just a moment to kind of walk you through how you write a persuasive paragraph.